The winter rain hammered against the windows of Marino's bistro when Claire stumbled through the back entrance, her face a canvas of purple and black bruises, her right eye swollen shut, her lip split open and still bleeding. She was just a 26-year-old server working double shifts to make rent after finally finding the courage to walk away from Marcus, her boyfriend of 4 years who had slowly transformed their relationship from romance into a living nightmare. Nobody expected that this Friday night would change everything. Nobody imagined that a man like Vincent Russo, the feared Mafia boss who controlled half the city's underground operations, was sitting in that shadowy corner booth, observing every detail of the scene unfolding before him. And certainly nobody could have predicted that Marcus, the man who swore he loved her but only knew how to destroy her, had less than 12 hours left to live. Claire barely made it past the kitchen door before her knees buckled. She grabbed onto a prep table, gasping, her ribs screaming in protest with every breath. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. Didn't want the questions, the pitying looks, the shame that burned hotter than any physical pain. But it was too late. Vincent Russo lifted his eyes from his glass of bourbon and froze completely at the sight of that fragile woman. That soft-spoken server who always served him with quiet kindness, entering broken like a wounded bird searching for a place to die. He wasn't a man who felt pity. He was a man who delivered justice. And justice in Vincent Russo's world meant blood. Who did this to you? Vincent's voice cut through the silence of the restaurant like a blade through silk. Claire froze. She knew that man. Everyone knew who he was. Vincent Russo wasn't just another wealthy customer. He was power incarnate. He was fear made flesh. He was the reason people vanished when they made serious mistakes. And now those dark, penetrating eyes were fixed on her, waiting for an answer Claire didn't have the courage to give. Because answering meant condemning Marcus to death. Because answering meant admitting she'd been too weak to protect herself. Because answering meant accepting that she needed help from a dangerous man to escape another one. Nobody, Mr. Russo. I just fell, Claire whispered, lowering her eyes and trying to move toward the employee locker room. But Vincent was already standing, his imposing figure blocking her path with a presence that made the air feel heavier. He didn't touch her, but he moved close enough that Claire could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the scent of danger that seemed to radiate from every fiber of his being. Vincent tilted his head slightly, studying every mark on her face with an attention that bordered on obsession. It wasn't desire, it was rage. A cold, calculated rage that Claire immediately recognized as far more dangerous than any explosion of violence. You think I'm stupid, Claire? Vincent asked in a low voice, pronouncing her name with a familiarity that made her shudder. You think I can't tell the difference between a fall and a beating? I've been watching these marks for weeks now. I see you trying to hide the bruises under makeup. I see you limping when you think nobody's looking. And I've been waiting, Claire, waiting to see if you'd have the courage to ask for help. But apparently you'd rather die than admit you need protection. Each word came measured, controlled, but loaded with a silent promise of imminent violence. Claire felt tears burning in her eyes and finally broke down, clutching the nearest table as sobs racked her body. It was Marcus, my ex-boyfriend. He won't accept that I ended things. He finds me at work, at my apartment, everywhere. And every time it's the same thing. He says he loves me, then he hurts me. He says we'll get back together, then he destroys me a little more. And I don't know what to do anymore, Mr. Russo. I don't know how to get away from him without ending up dead. The confession came out broken, drowned in tears and accumulated despair. Vincent said nothing for a long moment, just watched Claire crumble in front of him with that unreadable expression that made him the most feared man in the city. Then he pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number, keeping his eyes fixed on her as he spoke to someone on the other end. Tony, I need an address. Marcus something. Claire's ex-boyfriend, our server. I want to know where he lives, where he works, where he breathes. I want everything in the next 2 hours. Vincent hung up and finally touched Claire, placing one hand on her shoulder with a gentleness surprising for someone known to break bones without hesitation. You're going home now, Claire. You're going to pack your things and stay in the apartment my men will show you. And tomorrow morning when you wake up, Marcus won't be a problem anymore. I give you my word. The promise was simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying. Because when Vincent Russo gave his word, bodies appeared in the harbor. Before we continue with this intense story, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because stories like this deserve to be shared and discussed. Now let's continue, because you need to know what happened to Marcus. Claire woke up the next morning in a bed that wasn't hers, in an apartment that looked like it belonged in an interior design magazine. Her body aching less than expected, but her heart heavy with guilt. She had slept only 3 hours, tormented by nightmares where she saw Marcus being tortured, where she heard his screams, where she saw herself as an accomplice to a murder that hadn't happened yet but she knew was inevitable. The morning light filtered through white silk curtains and illuminated the luxurious living room, so different from her tiny, grimy apartment where Marcus used to break in through the window whenever alcohol and rage mixed inside him. She got up slowly, each movement a painful reminder of the last beating, and walked to the window to watch the city waking up below, oblivious to the fact that at that exact moment, a man was being hunted like an animal. Claire pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes, trying to decide whether what she felt was relief or terror, gratitude or guilt, freedom or simply another form of prison. The truth was that Claire had tried everything before reaching this point. She had gone to the police 9 times over the past 3 years, always with her face marked, always with her ribs aching, always with the hope that this time someone would do something. But the answer was always the same. Without witnesses, without concrete evidence, without catching him in the act, there was nothing they could do. Restraining order? Marcus would tear up the paper in front of her and laugh, saying that paper wouldn't stop him from doing whatever he wanted. Police report? He had a drawer full of them at home, used them as trophies, as proof that the system couldn't touch him. And gradually, Claire came to understand a bitter truth. She was alone in this war, and Marcus knew it, savored it, fed on that power like a parasite, until one night she walked into Marino's, too destroyed to hide it, and found in Vincent Russo's eyes something the police had never offered. The real promise that this would end. Marcus woke up with a terrible hangover and a twisted smile on his face, satisfied with the previous night's work. He had taught that ungrateful bitch a lesson for thinking she could just end things with him and move on as if 4 years meant nothing. He had shown her who was in charge, who was the man, who had the power in that relationship. Marcus looked at his own hands, still slightly swollen from punching her face so much, and felt a wave of sick pleasure course through his body. He felt no remorse. He never did. To Marcus, Claire was his property, and property didn't have the right to choose, didn't have the right to a voice, didn't have the right to breathe without his permission. He got out of his messy bed, put on the same dirty clothes from the day before, and decided he was going to look for Claire again, just to make sure the message had been clear enough. He needed to see her submissive, needed to see her afraid, needed that sick validation that only came when he managed to break another piece of her. But when Marcus opened the door to his filthy apartment on the 4th floor of a nearly abandoned building, he found 3 men in black suits waiting for him in the hallway. They weren't cops. Marcus knew cops, knew how they moved, how they talked, how they always gave a warning before acting. These men were different. These men had empty eyes and hands that seemed eager to break something, preferably bones. The biggest one, a guy nearly 6'5" with a scar running across his entire face, took a step forward and smiled without any humor. Marcus, right? The boss wants to talk to you. Let's take a ride. It wasn't an invitation. It was a death sentence disguised as politeness. Marcus felt his stomach turn when he realized these men hadn't come to talk, hadn't come to warn. They had come to collect. Marcus tried to run, but before he could take 2 steps, one of the men grabbed his arm with enough force to make the bone creak, shoving him against the wall with casual violence. I didn't do anything. You've got the wrong guy. I don't owe money to anyone, Marcus screamed, his voice rising 3 octaves as panic finally reached his slow brain. But the men didn't respond. They just dragged him down the stairs like a bag of garbage, throwing him into the back seat of a black car with tinted windows that seemed to have been made specifically for making people disappear. Marcus cried, begged, promised anything, but nobody cared. Because in Vincent Russo's world, men like Marcus didn't deserve mercy, didn't deserve a trial, didn't deserve anything except the pain they themselves had planted. The car drove in silence through the still empty morning streets, and Marcus realized he was heading to a place he wouldn't return from. The car stopped at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where screams don't reach civilized ears and blood is easily washed away. Marcus was thrown onto the cold concrete floor, his head hitting hard enough to make him see stars. When his vision finally cleared, he saw Vincent Russo sitting in a simple wooden chair, legs crossed, hands resting calmly in his lap, eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Marcus want to dig a hole and disappear inside it. Vincent didn't look angry, didn't look nervous, didn't look like anything. And that was far, far worse than any explosion of fury. "Do you know who I am?" Vincent asked calmly, his voice echoing in the empty warehouse like a divine verdict. There was something almost philosophical in his calm, as if he were about to give a lecture on consequences and Marcus was the only student present. Yes, I know, Mr. Russo. Please, there must be some misunderstanding. I didn't mess with anything that was yours. I don't owe money. I don't sell drugs in your territory. I didn't do anything. Marcus was on his knees now, hands clasped in supplication, his face covered with tears and snot as he begged for a life he knew was already lost. But Vincent just tilted his head slightly, as if studying a particularly interesting insect before crushing it. "You're right. You didn't mess with anything of mine, but you messed with someone I decided to protect. And that, Marcus, is a much, much bigger mistake." The explanation came slowly, each word heavy with deadly meaning. Marcus felt his bladder nearly give way when he finally understood this was about Claire, that pathetic server had achieved what he never imagined possible, the protection of one of the most dangerous men in the city. "Claire, you're doing this because of that bitch?" Marcus shouted, disbelief temporarily overriding fear. "She's my girlfriend. I can do whatever I want with her." "This isn't your business." The lack of awareness was impressive, even for someone about to die. Vincent didn't respond immediately, just made an almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. One of the men approached and broke Marcus's nose with a punch so fast he didn't even see it coming, just felt the explosion of pain and the taste of blood filling his mouth. Marcus fell sideways, screaming and clutching his face as blood poured between his fingers. Vincent stood up from the chair, walked over to where Marcus was writhing, and crouched beside him, his voice low and deadly when he finally spoke again. "Let me explain how things work in my world, Marcus. Women aren't property. Women aren't punching bags. Women aren't objects for you to unload your frustration as a failed, pathetic man. And when a worm like you lays a hand on a woman under my protection, you stop being her problem and become my problem." Vincent stood up and motioned to his men, who immediately grabbed Marcus and tied him to a chair in the center of the warehouse. Marcus was in full panic now, his mind finally comprehending the gravity of the situation, his body trembling uncontrollably as he watched Vincent circle around him like a predator studying the best way to kill its prey. Please, I'll never touch her again. I swear, I'll leave the city. You'll never see me again," Marcus begged, his voice broken and desperate. But Vincent just smiled, and that smile was the scariest thing Marcus had ever seen in his life. It was a smile that promised pain, that guaranteed suffering, that assured the next few hours would be the worst and last of his life. "I want to pause here for a second and ask you in the comments, what do you think should happen to men like Marcus? Should there be redemption, or is some damage beyond repair? Drop your thoughts below, because this conversation matters and it's one we need to have as a society. "You're right, you'll never see me again." "Nobody will," Vincent confirmed calmly, taking a cigarette from his pocket and lighting it with lazy movements, blowing smoke in Marcus's direction as if they were having a casual conversation about the weather. "But before you depart for your final destination, I need to make sure you understand exactly why you're dying today. It's not because you hit her yesterday. It's because you hit her yesterday and the day before and last week and last month. It's because you spent 4 years turning her life into hell and thinking there would be no consequences. It's because men like you need to learn that there will always come a day when you'll meet someone stronger, more cruel, more willing to do what needs to be done." Each word was a sentence, each phrase an irrevocable condemnation. Marcus felt urine soaking his pants as final terror set in. Marcus opened his mouth to beg one more time, but Vincent made a silencing gesture and turned to one of his men. "Tony, call Claire. Put it on speaker." The phone rang 3 times before Claire answered, her voice small and frightened on the other end of the line. "Hello, Claire, it's Vincent. I need you to answer a question for me, and I need you to be honest. Do you want Marcus to stay alive?" The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with years of pain and humiliation. Marcus held his breath, his eyes fixed on the phone as if it were his only chance at salvation, hoping Claire would have an ounce of mercy, a remnant of love for what they once were. He prayed to every saint he didn't believe in, silently begged that Claire would remember the good times, the first few months when he still pretended to be a decent man? No. The answer came firm, without hesitation, without remorse. I don't want him to stay alive. I want him to suffer everything he made me suffer. I want him to feel the pain I felt every time he raised his hand to me. I want him to know what it's like to be afraid to breathe, to exist, to simply be alive. And then I want him to disappear, Mr. Russo, forever. Claire's voice trembled at the end, not from doubt, but from a rage that had been swallowed for so long it finally exploded like a volcano. There were tears in her voice, but there was also steel, a strength Marcus had never heard before, because he had always made sure to break her before it could grow. Marcus felt tears running down his destroyed face, reality finally settling in like a blade to the heart. Vincent hung up the phone and looked at Marcus with something that almost looked like pity, but not exactly. It was more like he was looking at a problem finally being solved, an account finally being closed. You heard the lady? She wants justice, and I'm a man of my word. Vincent motioned to his men and began walking toward the warehouse exit, hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed like someone who had just resolved a minor problem on his daily agenda. You know what to do. Nothing quick, nothing clean. I want him to have time to reflect on his choices. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing in the empty space like the final nail in a coffin. Marcus screamed, but nobody was there to hear anymore. Nobody except the men who had clear orders and no rush to carry them out quickly. The hours that followed were the longest of Marcus's life. Vincent's men were professionals. They knew exactly how to cause maximum pain without killing, how to prolong suffering without allowing the mercy of unconsciousness. Each broken bone was a lesson. Each cut was a memory of the times Marcus had done the same to Claire. And while Marcus screamed and begged for mercy that wouldn't come, he finally understood what Claire had felt all those times. The fear, the helplessness, the desperation of knowing that nobody would come save him, that nobody cared about his screams, that he was completely at the mercy of someone stronger who had no interest in stopping. It was poetic and brutal justice. And Marcus realized too late that it had always been just a matter of time until his actions had real consequences. 4 days later, Marcus's body was found floating in the harbor on the outskirts of the city, unrecognizable, mutilated in ways that made even the most experienced police officers turn their stomachs. There were no fingerprints, no usable DNA, absolutely nothing that could connect that death to Vincent Russo or anyone else. It was just another nameless body, another archive case, another man who had made the wrong enemies and paid the price. The police interviewed Claire, of course, but she didn't know anything, hadn't seen anything. She was working at the restaurant all night with a dozen witnesses to confirm her alibi. And when they asked if she missed Marcus, Claire looked straight into the detective's eyes and said with frightening firmness, I miss the person I thought he was, but that person never really existed. Claire returned to work at Marino's a week later, but something had changed in her. She no longer walked with hunched shoulders, no longer averted her gaze when someone stared at her, no longer whispered her words as if she didn't deserve to be heard. She had found her voice in the darkness. She had discovered that justice sometimes comes from unexpected places and that protection can have the face of a dangerous man with a surprisingly just heart. Vincent continued to be her regular customer, showing up every Friday at 9 o'clock, always ordering the same bourbon, always leaving a generous tip. They never spoke about Marcus. They didn't need to. The silence between them was full of mutual understanding, an unspoken agreement that bound their lives in a strange and permanent way. It was a pact sealed in blood and silence, a connection that transcended words and explanations. The weeks turned into months, and Claire began to rebuild her life brick by brick. She started to smile for real again, not that forced, mechanical smile she used when Marcus was around, but a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. She started wearing colorful clothes again, stopped choosing pieces that hid every inch of skin for fear of revealing new bruises. She started going out with co-workers after her shift, accepted invitations to parties, allowed herself to laugh out loud, without fear that someone would punish her for being too happy. And every time she caught herself feeling guilty about what had happened to Marcus, she remembered the 9 times she went to the police and came back with nothing. The countless nights sleeping in fear of waking up and finding him in her room. The mornings looking in the mirror and not recognizing the shattered woman staring back. No, she didn't feel guilty. She felt relief. One night, Months later, Claire finally gathered the courage to approach Vincent's table at the end of her shift. She placed an envelope in front of him, her hands trembling slightly. Vincent looked at the envelope and then at her. One eyebrow raised in silent question. "It's a thank you letter. I know you don't need it and I know you'll probably throw it away without reading it, but I needed to write it. I needed to put on paper what I never had the courage to say out loud," Claire explained, her voice stronger now, more confident. Vincent picked up the envelope slowly, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief second, and for the first time since Claire had known him, he smiled. A small smile, almost imperceptible, but genuine. There was something almost tender in that gesture, a humanity he rarely allowed others to see. "I won't throw it away," Vincent said simply, tucking the envelope into the inner pocket of his jacket, right next to his heart. "And Claire, you'll never need protection again, because now you know how to protect yourself. I just gave you the initial push." He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the exit, stopping only to add over his shoulder, "But if you ever need me again, you know where to find me. Every Friday, 9 o'clock, always." And then he left, leaving Claire alone in the empty restaurant, with tears in her eyes and finally, a real smile on her face. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, took a deep breath, and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The months turned into years, and Claire thrived in ways she never imagined possible. She went back to school, finished her business degree, was promoted to manager at Marino's, and eventually opened her own coffee shop in a quiet neighborhood of the city. She never had another abusive relationship, never let anyone raise their voice at her again, never allowed her light to be dimmed by someone else's insecurity. And every Friday without fail, Vincent Russo showed up at her coffee shop at 9 o'clock, ordered the same bourbon, left a generous tip, and exchanged a few words about the week. They never became friends in the conventional sense of the word, but they had something deeper, more meaningful: mutual respect, born from a night where justice and protection met in the most unlikely place. Claire always reserved the best table for him, always personally served his order, always thanked him with a nod that said everything without needing words. The story of Claire and Marcus spread through the alleys and back streets of the city like a whispered warning. Women who suffered in silence began to find courage in the shadows, knowing there was someone willing to listen, someone willing to act, someone willing to do what official systems failed to do. Vincent never wanted to be a hero, never sought recognition for his actions, but he had a code, a line that couldn't be crossed. And men who hurt women were on the wrong side of that line. And in his world, crossing that line meant disappearing like Marcus disappeared, without a trace, without mercy, without a second chance. Other women started seeking out Claire, not to ask for help directly, but to hear her story, to know that it was possible to escape, that it was possible to survive, that it was possible to rebuild. Claire quietly created a support network, connecting women who needed help with resources that actually worked. She knew not everyone would have the same luck she had, that not everyone would find a Vincent Russo at the right moment. So she made sure to create alternatives, safe shelters, lawyers willing to work pro bono, psychological support groups, self-defense training. She transformed her pain into purpose, her tragedy into mission. And whenever a woman managed to free herself from an abusive relationship, whenever a survivor looked in the mirror and recognized herself again, Claire felt that Marcus's death had meant something greater than simple revenge. It had meant a small but real change in the world around her. One night, 6 years after that fateful dawn, a young woman of 21 walked into Claire's coffee shop with her face marked and her eyes frightened. Claire immediately recognized that look, that posture, that silent desperation that screamed for help without making a sound. She approached slowly, as she would approach a wounded animal, and gently guided the girl to a table in the back. "You're safe here," Claire said simply, and those 3 words made the girl collapse in tears. It was a Friday, almost 9 o'clock, and Claire knew Vincent would arrive any moment. She looked at the girl and saw herself 6 years ago, destroyed and without hope, and made a decision. When Vincent walked in and saw the scene, he didn't need explanations. He just nodded once, a silent confirmation that the cycle was about to repeat, that another man was about to learn that certain lines shouldn't be crossed. Claire's life had become living proof that survival wasn't enough, that it was possible to go beyond and thrive, flourish, shine. She was no longer the frightened server who stumbled into Marino's 6 years ago. She was a successful businesswoman, A discreet activist, a silent force of change in the community. She had scars, both physical and emotional, but she carried them like medals of honor, proof that she had survived hell and come out the other side stronger. And whenever she looked in the mirror and saw the small marks that makeup couldn't completely hide, she no longer saw shame. She saw victory. She saw resistance. She saw a woman who had looked death in the eyes and decided she deserved to live. Marcus became a name nobody spoke anymore, a memory erased as if he had never existed. His family asked questions at first, of course, but the questions died quickly when they began to discover the type of man he really was. Marcus's mother found a diary hidden in his apartment, full of sick notes about how to control Claire, how to break her psychologically, how to make sure she would never have the strength to leave. She found photos he had taken of her sleeping without her knowledge, like trophies of possession. She found deleted text messages where he planned even worse things, things that would make the beatings seem like mercy. And when Marcus's mother finally understood the monster she had raised, she stopped looking for answers. Some truths are too heavy to carry, and she preferred to believe her son had simply disappeared rather than face what he truly deserved. Claire also changed the way she saw Vincent Russo. At first, he was just an unlikely savior, a force of nature that had intervened when nobody else would. But over time, she began to understand the layers of complexity in that man. Vincent wasn't a hero, not in the traditional sense. He was still a criminal, still commanded illegal operations, still had blood on his hands from people who probably didn't all deserve to die. But he also had a code of honor stronger than many men who called themselves good. He protected the weak in his territory, punished predators, ensured certain rules were respected. It was crooked justice, born from the shadows, but it was justice nonetheless. And Claire had learned that the world wasn't black and white, that sometimes salvation came from unexpected places, that sometimes the devil you know is better than the angels who look the other way. The relationship between Claire and Vincent evolved into something unique over the years. They weren't friends in the conventional sense, didn't share personal stories or intimate confidences, but there was deep respect, a mutual understanding that transcended words. Vincent saw in Claire a strength he admired, an ability to survive and rebuild that he rarely encountered. Claire saw in Vincent a protection that went beyond the physical. A guarantee that as long as he was around, certain nightmares wouldn't return. It was a silent partnership, built on foundations of blood and redemption. And both understood there were debts that would never be fully paid, only honored through continuous actions. Claire's coffee shop became an unofficial sanctuary for women who needed help. She never advertised it openly, but word spread through underground channels, whispered between victims looking for a way out. They knew they could walk into that coffee shop, order a simple tea, and sit at the back table. Claire would understand. She always understood. And if the case was serious enough, if the danger was imminent, she knew exactly who to call. Vincent never charged for that protection, never asked for anything in return. For him it was simply a matter of principle. Men who beat women were cowards, and cowards didn't deserve to breathe the same air as decent people. It was that simple in his world. Over time, Claire started dating again. It was difficult at first. Every unexpected touch made her flinch. Every raised voice made her freeze. Every sudden movement transported her back to those years of terror. But she found Nathan, an elementary school teacher who had the patience of a saint and a gentle manner that never pressured her. Nathan knew her story. Claire had told him everything on their third date. Because she had learned that secrets were poison and truth was liberation. Nathan had held her hand and said he would never, ever hurt her, and that if she needed time, he had eternity. And gradually, Claire learned to trust again, to love without fear, to allow herself to be vulnerable without feeling weak. Nathan met Vincent on one of those ritual Fridays, and the initial tension was palpable. Nathan knew who Vincent was. Claire had explained the crucial role he had played in her salvation. And Nathan, being the intelligent man he was, understood this wasn't the moment for jealousy or insecurity. He extended his hand, thanked Vincent for protecting Claire when nobody else would, and made it clear he intended to spend the rest of his life ensuring she never needed that kind of protection again. Vincent assessed Nathan with those penetrating eyes for a long moment, then shook his hand and nodded once. It was a silent approval, a blessing from one protector passing the torch to another. And Nathan understood the unspoken message, take care of her, or you'll be the next body in the harbor. Years later, When Claire and Nathan got married in a small, intimate ceremony, Vincent was there, not as a guest of honor, not sitting in the first row, but present nonetheless, watching from the shadows as he always did. Claire saw him entering discreetly at the back of the church, wearing an impeccable suit, and their eyes met for a brief moment. She smiled, a smile full of gratitude and genuine affection, and Vincent responded with an almost imperceptible nod. He didn't stay for the reception. It wasn't his place, but the fact that he showed up meant everything to Claire. It meant that strange, deep connection they had forged that terrible night 6 years ago was still alive, still real, still mattered. Claire eventually had children, 2 girls and a boy, and she raised them all with fierce awareness about respect, consent, and the importance of never, ever raising your hand to someone you love. Her children grew up hearing stories about the importance of defending the weak, about how true strength comes from protecting, not dominating, about how the world needs more people willing to do what's right even when it's difficult. Claire never told them the complete details of what happened to Marcus. They were too young to carry that weight, but she planted seeds of empathy and justice that would grow with them, ensuring the next generation would be different, better, more aware. Marcus's legacy was oblivion and shame. Claire's legacy was change and hope. Over the years, she calculated that she had directly or indirectly helped more than 150 women escape abusive relationships. Some found refuge in the shelters she helped finance. Others found courage through the support groups she organized monthly. A few, in the most desperate cases, found more definitive justice through Vincent's silent intervention. Claire wasn't proud of that last part, but she also didn't pretend regret. She had learned that sometimes the system fails, that sometimes the law isn't enough, that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is with another monster willing to fight on your side. Vincent also changed over the years, though in more subtle ways. He continued being who he always was, a dangerous man who commanded a criminal empire with an iron fist. But he also became known as someone who protected women and children with particular ferocity. His reputation on the streets changed slightly, from simply feared to feared, but also strangely respected by certain communities. Single mothers in dangerous neighborhoods slept better knowing Vincent Russo wouldn't tolerate predators operating in his territory. Abused women whispered his name as a last hope when all other doors closed. He never sought that reputation, never wanted to be seen as a protector, but it happened anyway. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a part of him that appreciated being seen as something beyond a simple criminal. The truth is, nobody is born a monster, not Marcus, not the men who worked for Vincent. Marcus was raised in a home where his father beat his mother and it was considered normal, where boys learned that brute force was synonymous with masculinity, where vulnerability was weakness and control was love. He never really had a chance because he never saw a different example. That didn't excuse his actions, didn't erase the pain he caused, but it explained the cycle. And it was that cycle Claire was determined to break. Each woman she helped was potentially a son who would grow up without trauma, a daughter who would grow up knowing her worth, a family that wouldn't perpetuate violence to the next generation. It was slow work, invisible work, but it was essential work. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to this story until the end. Stories like this need to be told, need to be shared, because justice doesn't always come from the places we expect. And protection doesn't always have the face we imagine. If this story touched you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? What do you think about the choices Claire made? Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, leave a like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more we talk about domestic violence, about toxic relationships, about the importance of protecting those who can't protect themselves, the closer we get to a world where stories like Claire's become the exception, not the rule. And if you're going through something similar right now, remember, you deserve protection, you deserve peace, you deserve to live without fear. And there's always, always a way out. Even if it comes from the shadows, you're not alone. You never were.